think it's about time that I shared my story with the world, and Twitter seems as good a place as any. It was easily the most traumatizing thing that has ever happened to me. I was around 9 years old. I had a pretty normal childhood up to that point. I lived with my parents in a standard 2-bedroom house. Nothing too special, but it was alright. Of course, once everything started happening, my opinion on the house changed drastically. I started to hear noises every night when I was trying to sleep. It was like there was something in the walls of my room, or maybe the vents. What made it even worse was that there was an air vent on the ceiling right above my bed, so the sounds came through very clearly. I didn't know if it was my imagination or not, but to me, it sounded like breathing. I would tell my parents about it every morning, but they never gave it much thought. They always said it was raccoons in the attic or something. They told me to just ignore it and they would call pest control at some point. I didn't really believe them, but I was just a kid. What else was I going to do? Things got even more disturbing when I began to notice that food was disappearing from the kitchen. Usually, it was just little things, a bag of chips, or a half-eaten sandwich from the fridge. Every now and then it would be something bigger, like leftovers from a restaurant that we had gone to the night before. My parents told me that I was just imagining things, that I had obviously eaten that stuff and just forgotten, but I knew that it wasn't me. I had no idea what was going on. Plus, the ventilation in the house started to go bad during the summer and winter. It was like our vents were clogged up with something. At first, it was just the little stuff, the noises and the food. Nothing that I could really know for sure was anything more than my mind playing tricks on me. But then everything got even creepier. I could swear that I saw eyes looking at me from the vent in the ceiling every night. I'd be scared as hell, but I always just brushed it off as raccoons. Like my parents had said, they had to be right. This went on for a few months. Every night I'd hear the same noises and I would see the glare of eyeballs staring down at me. I tried to keep making excuses for it. I told myself that it was all in my head. I tried to ignore it, but I was barely sleeping anymore. Every time I went to bed, it was a nightmare. One night, I decided that I had to know for sure. I was just a kid, so I was terrified out of my mind, but I knew that I couldn't go on living that way. I grabbed a flashlight from my drawer in the kitchen and slowly brought it up to the vent. It took every ounce of courage that I had. My hands were trembling, and when I did, I almost fell off the bed. I saw the scariest face that I had ever seen. It was right up at the vent, staring down at me with this horrific grin. I dropped the flashlight and got the hell out of there. I ran to my parents' room to wake them up. When I finally got them awake, they shit bricks. My parents locked the door to their room and we all stayed huddled together in the dark, terrified that the intruder would attack us.
Oh my god, what do we do?
Call 911!
Hello? There's someone in our house!
My dad stared at the door, waiting to charge at the intruder just in case he came bursting in. It was the longest few minutes of my life. Every tiny noise made me jump. Every creak could have been the man about to break down the door. I thought my heart would explode. My mom started crying. After what seemed like hours, the cops finally arrived. They brought us outside for safety. It was like we had been rescued from some kind of prison. Then they went back inside to investigate the intruder in the vents. They discovered a man in the vent right above my bed. But what was even more disturbing than that was that this man was dead. The police had no idea how he had died. There were no obvious signs on the body. He was just laying there, with some horrifying grin on his face. After further investigation, the police determined that the man had been living in our house for quite some time. He had obviously been sneaking out and stealing food in the middle of the night while we were all asleep. I don't know how none of us had ever caught him. They found a ton of garbage and food wrappers up there with him. That's probably what had been blocking our ventilation. He had easily been up there for months, coming and going like a ghost. No one knows where the man came from or how he got into our vents. The man just so happened to die while above my room, which explains why I always heard noises every night and why I saw someone staring at me. Who knows how long he had been dead right above me. I'm not exactly sure why I've decided to share this story now. I never told anyone what had happened when I was a kid. I was too freaked out. I have since shared my story on Twitter on a public blog. All I hope is that whoever hears this can avoid living in sketchy places like that till this day. I'll never forget that face staring back at me from the vent, and I'll never forget those eyes glinting in the darkness. This story was inspired by a horrific true Twitter blog posted by a man who claims to have experienced the ordeal in 1981. The animation pretty much sums up what went down. After experiencing constant ventilation problems and missing food items from time to time, it all made sense when the man discovered eyes peering through a vent at night while watching him sleep. It was alleged that the man saw eyes in the vent every day and night, and finally decided to tell his parents about it, which led to the discovery of a deceased body, belonging to a man who had been living behind his family's walls for years. This happened a few years ago, and unfortunately, I still remember everything like it was only yesterday, giving me nightmares every single night. I would always hear a familiar knock every time I was asleep in bed that went sort of like this. I wasn't always this paranoid, but I assumed it was just debris or birds outside my bedroom. Other than that, my stay in Canada was rather one of the creepiest experiences of my life. I'm an international student from India, studying chemical engineering at one of the best universities in Canada. The good thing about my situation at the beginning was that I lived on the first floor of a small dormitory next to the campus. However, every good experience had an equivalent bad encounter, and one of them was being isolated. In a stereotypical setting, many people joke about Canadians being super nice, and while that was true to some extent, my reality was the complete opposite. In the area where I lived, no one wanted to hang around me, so I didn't know anyone. I often went on social media to get updates from my friends and family back home on Twitter, and I admit that modern technology helped me feel less homesick while far away from the people I cared about. Unfortunately, as time passed, my homesickness only became worse. I remember sleeping one night when I heard the familiar knock on my window, followed by a phone notification. I got up to check my phone and saw it was a notification from Twitter, which was odd because it was incredibly rare for me to receive them on this platform. Somehow, Twitter recommended a page for me to check out. The page was called Canada Creep. At first, I thought it would be a page full of scary photos and videos, but to my surprise, the page had multiple bizarre-looking images of women taken from a cell phone, and it didn't look like they were edited. They were candid photos of women at the gym, sidewalk, restaurant, and school, so it was evident that whoever owned this account was a creep. But what came next made me extremely anxious. As I scrolled up, a familiar face appeared. It was a photo of me in school. I covered my mouth in horror, and as I looked further, I saw more images of me along the sidewalk, as if someone had been taking pictures of me from behind. Things were getting serious now, and I couldn't take this lightly. Whoever was taking photos of me was clearly a stalker. When I scrolled to the top of the Twitter page for the latest post, I saw another candid image of me, and this time I was on the bed browsing through my phone. Then, I felt chills all over my body when I saw that I was wearing the exact same clothes in the photo, like it was taken about a minute ago. As hesitant as I might have been, I gathered my courage and slowly turned to face the window where the photo had been taken. And that's when I saw a creepy old man smiling at me with his face pressed up against the glass. I screamed for help as the old man tried to break in. He kept banging on the window until the glass finally shattered, prompting me to run to my roommate's bedroom just across the living room. I then opened the door and immediately locked myself in with her, asking her to call the cops. As she dialed and was on the phone with the operator, I was convinced it was only a matter of time until he could barge into the room and harm us. And that's when it hit me. It was the same knocking pattern that I had been hearing for the last several nights. My roommate and I just sat on the bed, staying put and awaited for the cops to show up. Hopefully the guy would just go away. A few minutes passed, and there was no creepy knocks or sounds outside. The police eventually arrived. However, the man was no longer there. They searched in and out of the vicinity, but the only evidence they found was the shattered window. I reported to the police what had happened and how it began on Twitter. When they further investigated the man's Twitter account, it could no longer be found, indicating that the old man had already taken down the page. They did everything they could to trace him but found nothing. Weeks turned into months, and nothing ever came up. Even when the number of security guards and CCTV cameras increased in the apartment and school premises, I was still anxious, becoming paranoid. It was stressful for a long time looking over my shoulder every now and then, wondering if there was someone from afar staring at me or taking pictures of me. Unfortunately, this wasn't the kind of attention I wanted, and aside from that, I had to undergo therapy multiple times just to get a bit of comfort. A few more months passed, and I finally got a call from the cops, telling me they had caught the man who attempted to harm me and my roommate. Later on, they further explained that this creep was an old Canadian man who intentionally stalked multiple various women throughout the city while taking inappropriate pictures without their consent. It just so happened that I became one of the many victims of his voyeurism, which traumatized me. Since then, I would always cover the apartment windows with a curtain, hoping I would never have to see another man with a creepy smile ever again. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident that happened in 2017. There was a Twitter account called Canada Creep, which was a page that had images and videos of multiple women being filmed on the streets, and even in undisclosed locations without their consent. After police launched an investigation, the account was linked to a 44-year-old man named Jeffrey, who was able to amass a following of over 17,000 followers since the account was created. The page was then taken down, and the man was sentenced accordingly.
Recently, I moved out of my parents' house. Not for any real reason. I just figured it was time for me to be out on my own. The only problem was rent was expensive, really expensive. Plus, I was still in college, so I needed a place close to campus, which just made it worse. A mortgage was only slightly cheaper, and it's not like I could have afforded to buy any property anyway. The only other option that I found was to live in a large house and split the rent with 3 other roommates. It wasn't the most ideal, but it was easily the most affordable. I decided to take it. I guess most people wouldn't be comfortable living with strangers. I didn't mind too much though. I'd always been pretty good at meeting new people. I was going to share the place with 3 other guys, Tony, Zach, and Melvin. I knew absolutely nothing about them, other than that they couldn't afford to live on their own either. The other 3 had already been living together for a little bit. I was replacing their 4th roommate who had just moved out. Once I moved in, I decided I would introduce myself to each of them, being the new guy. Plus, I wanted to get their contact information just in case I needed to get in touch with them. I went to each of their rooms and introduced myself and exchanged contacts. They were all pretty chill, except for one. When I went to Zach's room, he watched me with a very unsettling, creepy look on his face the entire time. The whole interaction was incredibly awkward and strange. He seemed to have this habit of staring at you throughout the entire conversation. He didn't take his eyes off me once. I tried to keep it light, but he didn't seem to know how to have a normal interaction. He kept trying to make lame jokes that just made everything worse. When I asked for his number, he gave me his Twitter account instead. I reluctantly gave him mine in return. I felt a little uncomfortable about it, but I didn't care too much since I rarely use Twitter. Zach told me that he preferred to use Twitter instead of texting because it gave him a chance to see what I was doing in life through my tweets. It made me feel super awkward, and I told him that I basically never tweeted, but he didn't seem to care. He just smiled and stared at me blankly. I decided to leave it at that and walk out of his room quickly. Throughout the time that I stayed at the house, I generally kept to myself. I just wanted a chill place to live while I worked and saved money. Unfortunately, things started to get really weird. I would be in my room doing homework or studying when I would suddenly get distracted by notifications from Twitter. Every time I checked, it would be a tweet from Zach. They'd say things like, "Met this cute guy yesterday," or "I love blonde dudes." I felt extremely uncomfortable by them as I assumed that Zach had to be talking about me. At least my other 2 roommates were cool. I started to really get along with Tony and Melvin. We actually shared a lot of the same interests and began to hang out a fair amount. One night, We had been hanging out in Tony's room until pretty late. When I left the room, I found Zach standing outside in the dark hallway, staring at me with the angriest face ever and pouting like a man-child. I was scared as hell. I awkwardly walked into my room and locked the door behind me. I had the freakiest feeling that Zach was going to barge in behind me. Then, I got a notification on my phone. I checked it to find that it was another tweet from Zach. I want to butcher my roommates. I was scared shitless. I tried to just shake it off as Zach only messing around, but I barely slept that night. The next day, I decided to stay over at a friend's from class's place that was fairly close by. The plan was to stay overnight, but after I had been there for a few hours, I started to reconsider. It just made me furious that I was scared to go back to my own home because of Zach. I told myself that I couldn't let him keep me away, that I was just letting his psycho mind games get to me, so I went back. When I got there, it was fairly late, like 9:30 or 10. The house was dark from the outside. It looked a little spooky. Honestly, I was still pretty freaked out by the idea of going back in, but I knew I had to do it. I unlocked the door and walked inside. All of the lights were off in the living room and the kitchen. I called out to see if anyone was there. Hello? I knew that Melvin was out of town, but both Zach and Tony would normally be home at this time. It was strange that I didn't see either of them. Then, I saw a light coming from Tony's room. Tony? I walked a little bit closer and saw something pouring out from under the door. It was blood. Tony, are you okay? I threw the door open and ran inside. I found Tony on the ground, motionless, with Zach standing over him. He was holding a knife that was covered in blood and laughing like a lunatic. I got the hell out of there and ran out of the house. Once I got a little bit away, I called the cops and told them everything. They arrived a few minutes later and arrested Zach. He didn't do anything to resist them. He just smiled the whole time. I know that if I hadn't stayed at my friend's house, I'd be dead too. It was all up to chance. Luckily, Melvin had been out of town as well, where I'm confident that Zach would have butchered all three of us, just like he said he would. The story was inspired by an Arizona man who tweeted that he needed to move out of the home he was living in before he committed to fatally harming his roommates. Here's a screenshot of the tweets below. Here you can see that Zachary appears to tweet about wanting to purchase a firearm and doing the unthinkable. The tweets were posted about a day before he called the police and actually admitted to committing the act he claimed. One of Zachary's roommates unfortunately got the shitty end of the stick, resulting in Zachary getting 12 years in prison for his manslaughter conviction.